Hi, and welcome to the first episode of Cosmic Echo, a podcast about exploring the cosmos changing. In this podcast, we specifically are aiming to explore altered states of consciousness through either dreaming, use of hallucinogens and meditations, things like that, as well as we'll be interviewing people that are interested or have had these experiences and are considered experts in those fields. So with this podcast, we try to aim to be more scientific, but I mean, there's still going to be personal experiences as well included into these, so you could say those would be subjective versus objective experiences that people have had. We're going to dive into that as well. Before we get started, I ask that if you enjoy this podcast, that you support our hard work and effort by going to our Patreon page and donating something, whatever you can afford there, to support us. It really helps the website out, as well as us to create new content for our viewers and readers. So to get started this episode, we're discussing sleep paralysis with Ryan Hurd, who is an expert in researching and exploring sleep and dreams. And Ryan runs a website called dreamstudies.org and also dreamstudies.com. And there you can learn more about sleep paralysis, lucid dreaming, out-of-body experiences, many topics that we also discuss on our website, tailleaders.com. But Ryan, he's spent a great portion of his life researching these topics, and he has a lot to share. So let's get started.
Ryan, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me today.
So, how did you get interested in lucid dreams?
Well, I guess I've been a lucid dreamer for most of my life. I think the first experience that I remember was when I was about 6 or so. It was a hypnagogic experience when I was trying to get to sleep, and I focused on this spot between my eyes, and something kind of miraculous happened, in which all these lights began to sort of swirl around, and then they created this tunnel. And then before I knew it, my little 6-year-old ego self was falling through this multicolored tunnel, and I popped into a dream. And that was the first time I ever had a lucid dream that I remember.
It's
pretty cool.
In reading a previous interview with you, the film Poltergeist had an impact on your youth as well?
Great. I'm glad that you read that. Yeah, and actually, the reason why I was having trouble falling asleep was definitely due to Poltergeist. I was supposed to see E.T., right? You know, they were out at the same time. And E.T. was completely booked. So my friend's derelict dad said, "Well, you can handle Poltergeist, can't you?" I'm 6, you know, so yeah. So it traumatized me and gave me nightmares, and of course I couldn't go to sleep for a long time. And actually, in a lot of my I guess early lucid dreams, when I would which were sometimes nightmarish, the clown from Poltergeist would kind of pop up at random times and sort of shock me into greater awareness, which was also greater horror. But those seemed things to be intertwined for me for some reason.
Actually, that's a really interesting concept. Do you I don't know, do you think that that your adrenaline is pumping, and when you get more scared, you become more aware, or how are those two things intertwined?
Yeah, I think that I think greater awareness and terror just kind of come together. I think it's part of our evolutionary, the way that we're built, basically. And a lot of times I become lucid in dreams when I'm nervous. I'm in crowds in my dreams or something, or I'm maybe in front of people, and I become sort of self-consciously aware in sort of a negative sense. But then I go, oh, this is a dream. And so it's interesting how anxiety and fear can trigger these kind of things. And then I guess the trick really is what do you do with that? How can you turn that and use this to your advantage? That's, I think, one of the, I guess, my lifetime struggles and passions with lucid dreaming is really how to turn all of these sort of things, using the emotions that you do have, to power greater awareness.
So can you talk a little bit about your website?
Sure, yeah. My website's dreamstudies.org. I started it in 2007 when I was just finishing up with grad school at John F. Kennedy University. And I did it because I wanted to start a sort of a dream research hub on the internet that had some sort of new information that was more reliable sources and with references and stuff. I was looking around as a grad student and noticing that there really wasn't a lot of good information on dreams except dream interpretation sites, which I actually enjoy dream interpretation sites. I don't have anything, against them, but that's not really what I was into. And there was no one really covering all the amazing things that's going on out there with dream research. The whole span of it, from the scientific stuff that's being done, with all these new technologies, to the phenomenology, to psychic dreams, to all the paranormal stuff, the whole spectrum. I noticed nobody's covering it, so I started just writing about what I like to write about, and it's sort of over the last, I guess, 3.5, almost 4 years, has been slowly transforming closer to my interest now that I kind of covered the basis. But anyhow, yeah, it's been great fun.
So, where are your interests lying these days in the realm of dreams?
So recently, I just published a book on sleep paralysis, and which is another topic where terror and consciousness kind of come together in a very bizarre form. And I'm still doing more research on that. I'm right now I'm collecting reports from people about their sexual encounters during sleep paralysis hallucinations, which I find really fascinating and pretty creepy. These the succubus attacks still happen, and not only do you have these accounts of sort of ghost rape and these incubus attacks where people are actually molested in their bed, but there's people who report actually having enjoyable experiences too. And that for me was kind of a mind blower. Like, oh, okay, so people are actually reporting having full orgasmic states in sleep paralysis after they have an encounter with an invisible entity that sits on their chest. And so I started asking, my subscribers and people on Facebook, have they ever had experiences like this after I heard the first one, and I got a flood of stories that just showed me that, yeah, this is a whole phenomenon that I had no idea about. So I'm collecting those reports right now, and probably what I'll end up doing is doing a second version of my sleep paralysis book at some time in the future and just adding that new material in.
So, Ryan, have you read the book The Terror That Comes in the Night?
Oh, yeah, David Hufford's book on sleep paralysis. It's great.
So I have not read it, but I did see an interview with him, and what fascinated me with the interview, at least, was that he seemed to conclude at the end that he had ruled out so many other variables that there really did seem to be something particularly odd going on with sort of being assaulted in the middle of the night. Where do you come down on that? Do you think it's purely psychological? Do you think there's something else going on?
Yeah, well, starting with Hufford, I saw probably the same interview. He hasn't done that many of them. And it's interesting because he says something in one of his interviews. It's that about how the name sleep paralysis, or the terror that comes with the night, how there's not really a term in our language for it in sort of American or Western, mythology. We have these other cultures around the world that have some very specific words that describe this phenomena, but we really don't. And he said something really peculiar, like, it's been erased from the cultural repertoire. That's evidence of a social control that is, very alarming, or something like that. And it was a really striking statement because he doesn't really say anything like that in his book. I mean, the book came out in the mid '80s. I think it was like '84 or something like that. And it's essentially it's medical folklore, and it's very dry. And he kind of goes through the phenomenology of these various narrative accounts of starting with people in Newfoundland, and then some American versions of sleep paralysis incidents. And he never comes out and says it so directly, that, yes, there's something going on here that's beyond psychology. He just says, this is a mystery, and we need to not look away because it's a mystery. And anyway, when I read Hufford's book, I mean, it definitely blew me away and inspired me. Because I had sleep paralysis since I was about 14 or so. And even now, I definitely don't feel like I understand the dynamics of all of what's happening with sleep paralysis, especially when you're talking about the hallucinations or the experience of meeting with an entity who is not you in that sort of shared dream space when you're paralyzed in your bed, but there's this creature interacting with you, and it's definitely not it's from this world or that world, but it's interesting because the dreaming piece for me, and I think maybe it'd be too easy to say this is just REM dreaming projected into the waking environment, which is sort of the scientific perspective of this. But there are a lot of REM characteristics to it that you can't ignore. And so, the fact that, like, for instance, even just the way you experience self and other, the separation of, like, where, my self ends and where everything else begins, in dreams, it gets kind of mixed up. Especially, you notice this in lucid dreams when you're talking with somebody and then your thoughts or emotions can get transferred almost in a classic psychoanalytic kind of way to the person you're talking to. And there's just this flux and flow of selfhood between, it's almost like a constellation of selves that happens when you're in conversation with people in dreams. Well, that you can see that in sleep paralysis encounters too, because fear, as it shifts around, as you're like noticing this creature in front of you, and its face is sort of changing and morphing. It's changing and morphing as in the moment as your fear and expectation rise and change, and there's all kinds of weird things like that happen. Like, okay, this is definitely in the dream space in a way, but that doesn't necessarily, in my mind, rule out other possibilities that there can be uncanny information that's coming through some of these conversations, which a lot of people have talked about and verified later on through like historic documents, information they've gotten through visitors. So yeah, I definitely do not claim to have all the answers.
And I'm so sorry, but we had some technical gremlins earlier, but you were just getting started speaking about sexual encounters during sleep paralysis. I'm sorry, could you kind of go back into that a little bit?
Sure. So we know about the succubus experience, the incubus experience, which is now called a sleep paralysis with hypnagogic hallucination, is how it's referred to today. But this is the full-on experience of being in sleep paralysis. You can't move, you can't talk, you're paralyzed due to REM atonia. And what happens is you feel a presence in the room, and then somebody or something sits on your chest or perhaps hovers over you. And the full-on incubus experiences is when this creature actually makes physical contact with you and may possibly sexually molest you. This is the stuff that we've heard about from witch accounts from the Middle Ages and even in American colonial days. And it happens today. There's lots of negative experiences that people have about being raped by ghosts and by spirits or by demons or by malevolent ancestors. And there's so many interpretations that really depends on, your culture of origin, your interpretation, and I think maybe alien abductions, some of these accounts, very well could be happening in sleep paralysis. You've got the alien robot insect probe going on. It's all happening there. Well, so what's interesting is that some people actually derive pleasure out of these experiences and report having orgasms, and they're not negative experiences. And I'm not saying that they're enjoying being raped. I'm saying they're not necessarily rape at all. They're paralyzed, and then someone comes and sits and has sex with them, and it's completely a pleasurable experience. I had no idea that this happened until I started taking some narratives from some of my readers at Dream Studies.
Wow.
Doesn't that just blow your mind?
Yeah,
I think what's going on is that there's just so many taboos, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how many possibly taboos can you stack up against each other right there?
Definitely. Well, a lot of people seem to be having, most people seem to have problems with sleep paralysis and having visions during that experience. So how do you suggest that they get over that, or they get help in order to overcome that? Because I see a lot of people that have sleep paralysis and they complain about the symptoms and try to get drugs and stuff like that, and it seems not to be helping. So what's your take on that, Ryan?
Yeah. I think that there's not a cure for isolated sleep paralysis, but it can be managed by managing stress levels, and that seems to be the most effective way of preventing encounters from happening. And because we know that isolated sleep paralysis, so this is sleep paralysis that is occurring with someone who doesn't have narcolepsy, who doesn't have another sleep disorder like sleep apnea, or something that's breaking up their sleep, fragmenting their sleep, and causing REM intrusion because of some other physical problem.
So there are cases,
sleep paralysis as well.
There are cases where this is kind of normal, I guess.
So, I mean, basically, for instance, like narcoleptics, something like 60% of people with narcolepsy experience sleep paralysis, and their encounters are terrible. They can experience it for up to an hour at a time. It can happen during the day. They have cataplexy as well, where they'll go paralyzed just from like a sudden emotion or something like that. That's a little different, but the sleep paralysis can happen just as suddenly, just as easily. And for that, definitely pharmaceuticals that essentially do things with the serotonin system are what help this. So, that keep, basically what it does is these drugs that repress REM to a degree where it only comes at certain times rather than at erratic times, and that's how you treat narcolepsy, and you don't treat it very well, actually. There's no cure for it either. So, but when sleep paralysis comes in isolated way, when you don't have a sleep disorder, that's what they say is isolated sleep paralysis, and this is it happens to people who are essentially stressed out or not getting enough sleep or going through life changes. And so anything that can really disturb your center, your well-being, your emotional ground, can cause it if you're susceptible to it in the first place. And no one's really sure what exactly that is yet. There's some sort of genetic thing. Most psychiatrists assume there's a genetic connection. No one's researched it. We don't know what it is. So I tell people, work on your stress. And it's just like, right, it's so easy, right? It's the hardest thing to do in life in general is to have good ways of combating stress, because you can't make it go away. And besides that, there's different tactics you can do in the moment to either wake yourself up out of it, or there's things you can do to try to work with the encounter itself, to take it away from the nightmare. And I do this sometimes, but to be completely honest, when I have sleep paralysis, and I had it 3 times in the last week because I had the flu. I was sleeping a lot, and 2 out of those 3 times I just bailed like immediately. I'm just like, no, I'm not dealing with this, and I woke myself up. And then the 3rd time I stayed, stuck around for it, and kind of wish I didn't. So, it's interesting. You never know what you're going to get. Uh, I'm still really working with the dynamics of it myself. It's this intense, negative, almost, I would say, like underworldy kind of energy that comes with it. And the creatures that come, they're sort of different for everybody, but they come from under the earth.
It just kind of rub you the wrong way.
And now I have had positive experiences with sleep paralysis. I've had positive encounters, actually healing encounters, but they've been pretty few and far between. But, and I tell those encounters to people because when you realize, this actually could go another way, it kind of opens up the paradigm, because it doesn't have to be a nightmare. You actually can take the sleep paralysis and you can, either, if it's an entity, that's the hardest thing to work with. But if it's a non-entity sleep paralysis, you can push it into a lucid dream or an out-of-body experience pretty easily. When working with an entity experience, that's a dynamic fun fest that I still have not completely succeeded at. But you can ask questions, and you can do things like you have to be courageous, basically, is what it comes down to, is to sort of buck up and but also at the same time, like, have, this sort of compassion. It starts with self-love, and you emanate it outwards, and it's sort of like trust. But trust, if you do trust the wrong way in the moment, that actually can give you the reverse experience, because you might think, okay, I'm trusting, but what you're thinking really behind that is, I'm trusting you're not going to stick that probe up my ass. And then that's exactly what happens. And that's sort of the dream energy, is that, for everything that you think, there's a thought underneath it. And that's where the imagery comes from. So it's pretty complex.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Have you noticed that the positions that you fall asleep in have any effect on your paralysis, or?
Yeah, for me, most of the time, unwantedly, I'll get it if I'm sleeping on my back. And so for me, that's in the mornings, because I tend to rotate around. I'm a light sleeper, so I wake up pretty much after every major sleep cycle, every like 90 minutes or so. And I roll over, and I roll over, and I roll over. And then usually in the mornings, I sleep on my back, and that's when you have the long REM cycle, and that's when I will tend to get it the most. And so if I don't want it to occur, I'll notice, I'm on my back, and I'll go over onto my side, and then I won't have a problem at all with it. Now, I often have sleep paralysis as well, sleeping on my stomach. And usually those go to out-of-body experiences, and I can't really explain to you why. But there's never a visitor in those kind of moments, or at least not that I can recall right now. It's more like I feel the paralysis, and then I sort of sink through the mattress of the bed, and then kind of enter that void-like dream space, and then either another dream occurs, or I wake up out of it a little bit later. Different things happen.
Why is it that when you sleep on your back that sleep paralysis seems to occur the most? I don't think you answered that, but
I don't think anybody has actually explained it. I've heard a chiropractor say, a chiropractor left a message on Robert Moss's blog a while ago, suggesting that it had something to do with the pressure on the spine and the amount of blood that's let into the brain when you're on your back, and that perhaps that has something to do with it. And but honestly, that's the first time I've ever heard anyone try to posit why.
Yeah, I think it was a Tibetan book of dream yoga I read about, and they talked about how it could possibly be like your chakras being aligned or something like that. And I guess they experience sleep paralysis a lot too. So
yeah, and that's a great book, and I'm really glad that you mentioned that. I remember a few years ago trying some of the techniques in that book, and it brought on sleep paralysis. I had actually some pretty interesting experiences from it. And one of their techniques was to sit cross-legged, but then kind of lean back a little bit, and so you have lots of pillows behind you. So you're elevated, and you're sitting cross-legged. And for me, that was comfortable enough that I could fall asleep. And what it does is it prevents you from falling into too deep of a sleep. And so you stay basically at sleep onset for longer, so you can experience hypnagogia. And that's essentially what happened. I mean, there was a moment of paralysis, but for me, that wasn't a defining experience. It was all these sensations that happened afterwards that I'm usually not consciously aware of. And so, yeah, I think it has something to do with the quality of sleep and the preventing you from falling into deep sleep. Some of these positions, but what the biological correlate to that is, I don't know.
Can you speak a little bit more about hypnagogia?
Yeah, sure. So hypnagogia basically means the imagery that comes from experiences at sleep onset and when you're coming out of sleep. So sort of the bookends of going to sleep and waking up. And they're called hypnagogic and hypnopompic for both of those, one and the other. But they both essentially are the same, and they're these sort of ephemeral images and sounds and sometimes smells, although that's pretty rare, that happen that most of the time we forget about them if we experience them at all. And sometimes it's just maybe 15 or 20 seconds, and then we fall asleep. Some people seem naturally to be able to extend this, and some of these positions might be able to extend them for you as well. I know one woman who meditates specifically within her hypnagogic state for up to 20 minutes, and she goes and lays down on a nap on her back, and she goes through this entire her entire ritual in hypnagogia.
Wow.
And she experiences lights and sounds and music and all kinds of things. And so it's a really incredible state. It can have sort of a negative and positive associations for people. Some people get it and it freaks them out because you can actually see hypnagogic images with your eyes open. You're coming out of sleep and your eyes are open. You're looking at the ceiling, and then you see a very common one would be roaches or spiders, crawling up the wall, like a huge ribbon of them, and then onto the ceiling, and then dropping onto the bed, and the hallucination is completely integrated with the waking world. You're seeing your room, you're feeling your body, you're in your bed, and then you're hearing the sounds of these creatures, and you're seeing them, and then you're feeling them as they drop onto the bed, like little pelting, pressure. And so it's pretty creepy for a lot of people. And some people actually will wake up, get out of bed, say to go to the bathroom, and still experience the imagery for up to a couple of minutes. And they think they're going crazy, but actually this stuff is completely normal, as long as it's sort of tied to these sleep onset stages, right? So it's not just happening in the middle of the day or whatever. Then we're talking more about narcolepsy again, when you start experiencing these things sort of erratically, in the middle of the day, at the end of, when you're just wandering around outside in the world. But when it's tied to this is completely normal and can be healthy and sort of fun. People see a lot of exciting lights, it's like fire blooms and fireworks and random objects. But I think really the coolest thing about it is the creativity piece. And it's just that people will work on problems that they have in the state, and it brings answers, almost like visual metaphors. Chemists have worked out solutions in hypnagogia. Thomas Edison used to use hypnagogia all the time to come up with new ideas. And so did Salvador Dali. I mean, a lot of his paintings, the surrealist painter, are directly from images in hypnagogia. And both of those guys actually use a very similar method in which they would fall asleep in a chair and have a spoon or a ball or something like that in their hand. And then when they fell asleep, their arm would slacken because of the REM, because of atonia that happens in your muscles. You slacken. They would drop the spoon or whatever it was. It would land on a plate, and it would wake them up. But in that instance, in that maybe 40, 50 seconds they had before they dropped it, they had this amazing dream. And then wake back up out of it, and then they continue with whatever they were working on.
That's awesome.
So I think it's a pretty unexplored state of consciousness. And, I mentioned Robert Moss recently. He's a writer who's talking more and more about hypnagogia these days. He talks about using it to go on vision quests. And I think that kind of opens it up to this idea where probably throughout history and through time, people have used it for healing and for sort of shamanic purposes, because it's a very reliable way to get into a lucid dream. Rather than trying to wait to become lucid in the middle of the night, rather you just keep your consciousness from the waking state into the dream world, and then you go about your business. And that's a lot what Robert Moss teaches.
So, in speaking about shamanism, what would you say is the connection between lucid dreams and hallucinogens, if any, or the hallucinogenic state, perhaps?
Yeah, it's a pretty fascinating connection, because they are connected, and there's been some researchers who've been talking about how the look and the feel and the experience of the lucid dream is extraordinarily similar to some of the high octane experiences of being on DMT, or at the peak of an LSD trip or mescaline. And they've been talking about this since the 60s. Charles Tart, in his Altered States of Consciousness, he goes on and on about this, and it's many of the people in his volume do as well. And then recently, there's been this this interesting collage between ayahuasca and lucid dreaming that's gaining popularity. And there's been a few researchers who've actually done some brain research work on people who, while they were in the throes of an ayahuasca journey, and experience in sort of comparing what's going on with the brain activity to those of what we know of what's happening with lucid dreaming. And there's some pretty interesting parallels in terms of for instance, the gamma output at the 40 hertz level in the frontal lobe. There's the same kind of activity happening in both these states, and there's this synchrony that comes with the hallucinogenic state and with lucid dreaming that you don't see in the normal waking state. You don't see in normal dreams. There's more parts of the brain that are on the same wavelength. That's the big picture, and so that makes you think. It makes you think. Well, what can we do with this state, or what's being done when we're in this state?
Can you speak more about sort of gamma waves? I've definitely heard of obviously being in delta and theta and alpha and beta states. What's gamma?
So gamma is the 40 hertz, and it's up there, and it hasn't necessarily come across the radar with lucid dreaming research because they were really focusing on alpha waves when they were doing this stuff in the 80s, and then I think it was maybe 10 years later, there was talk about how there was some strong beta activity in lucid dreams in a different part of the brain. And there's always, I have to say, it's kind of gamma right now is the flavor of the day when it comes to what's happening with lucid dreaming. They think that it might have something to do with the seat of consciousness being some kind of synchristic, almost crystalline, I don't even know how to say it, almost like a net that happens over the brain when you hit that level of activation. Now, the question is what kind of consciousness are we talking about? And it sounds like it's a sort of a linguistic consciousness that's relating back to itself, so we're talking about self-awareness in a I'm aware that I'm aware kind of way, but that doesn't necessarily imply, I don't know, a transcendent function, or that I'm necessarily, more hyper conscious than anybody else around me. It's just maybe I'm just more self-conscious than I am around me. Maybe I'm more anxious than those who are around me. The phenomenology isn't actually matching up yet with what's going on with the brain research. It's a problem I've noticed a few times, is that we've got a new toy, we've got these fMRIs, we've got really cool things happening with the brain imagery, but we're not really seeing such good parallels happening like on the ground with what people are experiencing with their sort of subjective reports. We're not paying very much attention to the words they use, the experiences they're having, and the experiences we're asking them to have. And so I'm kind of hoping that what we're going to see soon will be a better pairing of these things.
Well, speaking about the kinds of things that you can do with the hypnagogic state and with lucid dreaming, you actually have one of your latest articles on your site actually has to do with using lucid dreaming in archaeology, actually. Do you think you could speak a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, I did this fun pilot study when I was in Nicaragua a few years ago. And I guess to backtrack a little bit is that my first degree is in anthropology and archaeology from University of Georgia, and I worked as a field archaeologist for about 7 years in the United States. And so basically, I worked for private companies, and we would test, survey, and excavate various sites that had to be excavated, say for roads, constructions, and things like that, to meet, if we had to mitigate graves and things like that. And so that was sort of my first career, and I decided that I didn't want to go all the way and get my PhD, and I switched over to dream research. But I'm still fascinated by it, and I've always been particularly fascinated by rock art and the ancient glyphs and images that we have all over the world from Paleolithic times to it's just everywhere. It's almost in every continent, in every, well, not in every culture, but everywhere there's rocks that you can scrape on, people have scraped on them. And it's been interesting to me to think about, well, what are they? What's so important that they're showing? Because these artifacts are cognitive artifacts. You're actually looking at a projection of mental imagery of what people see, are seeing the world as and depicting it as. And that, to me, that's more interesting than the artifacts of, say, like a trash heap or, a stone wall, whereas you get information from that. But from a rock art, you could possibly get information about how do these people how do they see the world? How do they envision the cosmos? And then how do they make decisions and and all kinds of behavioral constellations that occurred on the material level based on the way that their minds mapped the universe. So that was kind of one of the things that's always tweaked me up a little bit. And so I had this opportunity to go to Nicaragua in 2006, and I did to part of the Ometepe petroglyph project. And this was on Ometepe Island in the middle of Lake Nicaragua. There's two volcanoes. This island is framed by two volcanoes. One is extinct, one isn't. And the whole island is covered with all these basaltic boulders. And they've been pounded on to make petroglyphs. And so the method would be some kind of other stone, and a pounder was used to kind of chip away to make indentions into this sort of soft like rock. And they're beautiful. It's full of just spirals and whirls and concentric circles and everything that you see when you lay your head down at night, and go to sleep. Or, the stuff, it's very similar to the stuff that you hear about, when people are on LSD or ayahuasca as well. It's just sort of that entoptic imagery, or the phosphenes and all that sort of elemental geometrical particles that, who knows where they come from and what's really going on with that. Is this abstract thinking? Is this just, the way the the eye's optical nerve is structured and we're reflecting it out back into the world. Maybe it's both and, So this was some of the questions and things I had when I went to Ometepe Island. And I just decided, since I was joining the project to help look for petroglyphs, that while I was there, I was going to do some dream incubations. And I was going to do some dream incubations about rock art in order to see if maybe I could just learn more about the rock art, or maybe just learn more about what I kind of experienced as the rock art in my own mind. And as it turns out, I had a lot of dreams when I was there. And again, I think this comes down to we dream more when we don't sleep as well. We wake up more. So when we're traveling, it's really great for dreaming. We tend not to dream well, especially, or sleep well, the first night we're someplace, right? There's something, I guess, inherently scary about that first night in a room you've never been in before. That's actually the night that sleep paralysis can come most often as well. And not only that, but I was sort of socially nervous because I didn't speak very good Spanish. And I was excited about being in, it was a complete culture shock. And so I was just my brain was just in ferment. And I was just having dream after dream after dream. And I had 100 dreams in something like 30 days that I recorded. And it's just it was this huge, it took I had to spend probably an hour and a half each day just writing the dreams down.
Jeez.
Which gets to a point you're like, I'm never going to live my life because I'm too busy writing my dreams. So in any case, when I was there, I had about maybe 7 or 8 lucid dreams about the rock art, in which I basically performed my task, which for me was to become lucid in the dream and then find some rock art and then essentially just see what happened, to view it, to look at it, to just, follow the thread, basically. And I had a bunch of dreams about the rock art, and they were pretty cool, pretty incredible dreams. And then I basically analyzed them, and then analyzed some field notes I had at a rock art site that I did a lot of sitting at. And when I kind of looked at all these themes together, I realized that there were some parallel threads that helped me notice an anomaly that I hadn't noticed before, that had to do with the vibrations I was experiencing at the actual site that I was sitting at every day. And this is just a very small thing, but for me, it sort of showcased how paying attention to your dreams when you're doing a research project that takes all of your mind and you're really into it. If you pay attention to your dreams, you can catch things that you may have missed because of sort of waking rational consciousness. And we tend to, if it's illogical, if it doesn't make sense, if it comes from out of nowhere, we'll kind of ignore it, we'll sweep it under the rug. But if you pay attention to your dreams, those things pop back out, and they're harder to ignore. And so it was really kind of a fun, I like to say, pilot study into how you could use lucid dreaming to help uncover biases and maybe even discover new information about anything you're working on, whether it be an archaeological project or really anything in the sciences or social sciences.
Thank you.
You're pretty much, I would consider you one of the experts in lucid dreaming and how to lucid dream. So could you tell some people some techniques maybe that would help them to lucid dream, and more about your experiments with that?
Sure. To start with, I've been lucid dreaming since, I guess, well, it's probably as a practice for about 15 years. But the dreams came to me spontaneously. And so I'm at a disadvantage when I teach lucid dreaming to people who have never had a lucid dream before, because mine always came spontaneously. And so that's just one of the things that makes it hard for me to teach very beginners sometimes. And I always preface that. And for that reason, I've never been a huge expert in what you would call the lucid dreaming induction techniques. There are a lot of other people out there who know much more about it than I do, because I didn't really ever have to work too hard at it. I would try a technique and it would work, but then I would generally move on. And I just, actually now I don't even usually incubate. I just let them come to me, and then I just work with them when they come spontaneously. Because I have this idea that the ones that come spontaneously, they have sort of they're sort of meatier than the ones that I try to have. They, and because the question is, well, why am I becoming aware right now? It arises for, it's almost not to say a purpose, but it's happening because of a cause. And it gives me an opportunity to take a look at that dream and what's happening in this moment, and, to face it, to deal with it, and to explore it, and all that kind of thing. So, but when I have incubated dreams, all of the classic stuff that LaBerge talks about is really, it's still the number one thing you can do is to set your intention, and then try the methods like wake back to bed, and just basically flip around with your REM cycle, and so you can fall asleep lucidly. And reality checks I've had not so good luck with. Sometimes they work. The best reality checks that worked for me were always the ones that, again, would come spontaneously. So rather than trying to make a reality check in waking life and have it filter into the dream, I go back into my journal and I look at, well, what, is weird in the dream itself that I've noticed in the past, and then I try to focus on those things. Basically, I strengthen what's already working, Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense.
Yeah, so for me, I have a lot of dreams about my teeth falling out. I mean, it probably happens once or twice a month. And I think this is just, it's a total, it's one of these dreams that everybody has, I think, at one point in their life. I happen to have them a lot, and I think probably it's because I had orthodontics, and I'm just obsessed with my teeth, and, and so, but I'll have the dream, I'll be in the mirror, and, there's just nastiness is happening, and I'm, trying to make it, and then I, when my teeth are falling out, I'm dreaming, and that's what I've taught myself. When my teeth are falling out, I'm dreaming. And I've had so many lucid dreams that started with that sort of terrible awareness, and then I'll walk through the mirror and enter into another dream, or go out of the room and fly, or do whatever. So it doesn't, the beginning of the lucid dream doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a bad dream.
Right.
But overall, it's interesting. I'm beginning to write an ebook about lucid dreaming for beginners right now.
Oh, great.
And as I come across this, the best things I can say for people is to really to make a kind of a plan about what they're doing. And it's not just about using certain techniques, but it's really about sort of saturating yourself with becoming more conscious in your waking life. Because that is what blends over into the dream. The crazy reality check may or may not go over. But if you are more self-aware during your day, you're going to have the same self-awareness come through during the night. And this is part of what we know about dreams in general, which they call it the continuity theory, which is sort of your thinking style, your cognition style is mirrored in the dream. The things that you think are most important in waking life, you'll see it in the dream. And I mean, this is why you can take a look at some, say a handful of somebody's dreams, and you can make all kinds of observations about what this person probably is and what they're interested in, and if they have animals, and, are they in high school, or you can really make a bunch of observations just based on what people are dreaming about. And so it's not just about content, though, it's about cognition style. And so that's why I suggest that people have some sort of process of, whether it be meditation, some kind of way of going inward that they do on a daily basis. And that really, I think, is the best way to get lucid. And it's, I don't know if you can do it in 7 days or less, but
That totally makes sense.
But see, for me, like, lucid dreaming isn't the goal. Lucid dreaming is like the fruit, like, because self-awareness itself is the goal. Lucid dreaming comes as a good work. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally makes sense. And another question for you: what are some of the good things that I guess that could come out of this lucid dreaming experience, and also some of the dangers maybe that people should be aware of when they're dealing with lucid dreaming?
Well, in terms of the good things, is lucid dreaming remains, I think, that the best way to explore the world as you think you know it, and then for exploding that world. It's the best way to push up against your belief structure and dissolve it, challenge it, or concretize it to reinvigorate it. We're constantly in dreams, kind of pitting these like long-term emotional memories against what just happened to us, and it's still true in lucid dream. Just because you have a little like speck of self-awareness in the dream doesn't sort of change how the dream was thrown in the first place. I mean, you're in a really kind of emotional, vibrant, landscape that is not based necessarily here in the present moment. You're in between all these worlds in these ages, which is why it always amazes me that the lucid dreamers are shocked when they can't control the whole dream.
Yeah.
Because it's just impossible. I mean, you can make objects appear and disappear. You can change a dream scene. You can make actions, but there's just too much going on to try to take control of that. And why would you want to? Because this is the imagination itself, and it's so much more creative than I am. My conscious mind. Like, why would I even want to be in control of what's happening when I'm in the lucid dream? So I've had this, probably I would call them religious experiences in the dream itself, where I've just been opened up to the greatest senses of awe and expansion that I've ever felt, and just really felt my actual self change, become bigger than who I am in waking life, and different than who I am in waking life. And you can really play around with that, and you can enter other dream characters, and you can change your own dream body, and you can dissolve your dream body and leave it behind, and all these sort of things that come with that ability to make choices. And as far as dangers, I mean, I think the dangers are, well, it's hard to talk about dangers. It's not. I don't think lucid dreaming is dangerous from the get-go. But you're going to run into resistances. Everyone will run into their own, specific set of resistances that they will hit in lucid dreaming. And when you hit them, they're going to feel really scary. Because it's one thing to say you want to be lucid, but it's another thing to become aware of something you don't want to become aware of. And when you're in the dream world, that's what you're up against. And so, I just encourage, courage and meeting the moment and doing the best you can, and walking away if you can't handle it. But you can, 9 times out of 10 you can handle it. And if it turns into a nightmare situation, which does happen occasionally, and you blow it and you wake up, you don't have to really worry about it, because don't worry, the nightmare will come back. And you have another blessed opportunity to find out what's going on, right?
Most definitely.
So there's definitely can be fearful experiences in lucid dreams, but they're not to be avoided. I encourage facing them. I don't necessarily encourage seeking them out, although that's a dark path. Some people go that way. It's not for everybody. But it's really, lucid dreaming is what you make of it.
Have you noticed diet affecting your experiences at all?
Yeah. I definitely will. I'll have less lucid dreams if I'm eating more like heavy foods in general. And actually, one time, when I was doing a master's thesis, which was another story of a long lucid dreaming incubation that I did, and I did the incubation for a couple of months, and I ended up having 10 lucid dreams that I used for my thesis.
Wow.
But I was in an incubation sort of stage for about 2.5 to 3 months. And I was doing regular meditations and regular activities and going to bed each night with the intention to be lucid. And I was doing all the journaling and all this sort of stuff. And I definitely increased my lucid dreams by about 4 times my usual. So I was having like 2 or 3 a week, which for me, that was a lot. And some people have that normally. And but for me, that was a lot. But what happened is that what I was doing with those particular dreams is I was trying to become aware in the dream, and then I was trying to suspend judgment as I entered a sort of void in the dream. And so I would go into I would like walk through a mirror, through a portal that I would devise, and the dream would completely disintegrate, right? And I would enter that gray space, as Robert Wagner calls it, or the lucid void, as I've said before. Other people have different words for it, but it's sort of like this. There's like this, almost like the static of a television set. All this energy. It's like the dream's potential, and you're in it, and you don't have a body, and you drift around, and it's incredible. If you stay in that place long enough, the dream will materialize around you again. And so what I was trying to do with these particular dreams was to enter that void and have no projections or expectations of what would happen next as much as possible, and let the dream recrystallize around me, and then see where I ended up. What happens? Where does the dream want to take me? And so it was a really intense experience because it was kind of scary to do that. It's sort of like casting yourself into the unknown. And in a lot of those dreams, actually, they had a lot of confrontational energies to them. And a lot of them actually were confrontational energies that dealt with my early childhood. And so I would come into the dream as a 7-year-old boy, and I would be just pissed off, just livid in my little 7-year-old boy body. And I'm looking around in the room that I'm in, and I'm still lucid in this dream. And I'm looking around at the room, and it's like decor is from the 1970s, which was the age I was at this time. And so there's just terrible wood paneling everywhere, and there's a radio with and it's got the felt or the fabric on the speakers of the radio, and anyway, it was just everything was very 70s, and I was experiencing a lot of what I don't know if these were, repressed memories, or if I'm kind of experiencing emotions in old settings, in old dream bodies. But it was kind of intense, and I would sort of use these dreams to I would see what happened, I would see who showed up, and then I would interact in the dream as I was embodied, as it happened. And what happened to my diet during that stage is that I completely lost my ability to digest. I was racked by constipation and diarrhea for weeks. And I'm thinking why this is happening to myself is wow, maybe I'm having problems digesting these dreams. And it's affecting my body. And so I had to start cleansing myself. And I cut out all the meat out of my diet, and I cut out drinking alcohol at night, and I cut out coffee and all the caffeine, and I kept stripping it down, saying maybe this will make a difference, maybe this will make a difference. And I finally ended up going on a cleanse for about 5 days, and then everything sort of worked again. And then I reintroduced food back into my system. But it showed me that sometimes when you do these things, that maybe it's best to cleanse first. If you're really serious, you want to dive headlong into lucid dreaming and explore some things, be ready for something to happen to your body. Be ready for some unconscious material to come up that you're not expecting. And that'll have an effect on your waking life, and it'll have an effect on your body. And you can prepare better for it by doing a cleanse beforehand and kind of cutting out, the stimulants and the alcohol and all that stuff before you go into the incubation. And that's what makes dream incubation sort of more successful anyway.
Well, thank you so much.
I had a question about, you talked about portals and how they work, kind of. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that, I guess?
Portals are my old friend. And they come easily if you can remember them in the dream. And you can make anything into a portal, really. Although it's easier to make certain objects into portals just because of the expectation factor. And so the best ones to use are glass-like objects, things like mirrors and windows. I've used television sets as portals in dreams before. They work fine. And but really you can use anything once you get used to it. And it's essentially just a matter of walking through a wall or sinking through the floor. But the cool thing about the portal is that it takes you into this void-like space, that sort of dream potential that we talked about. And I would love to know what's going on kind of in the brain when you hit that spot. I don't know if anyone's actually done any work on that, and it might be that you're very close to awakening and you're basically in a kind of a hypnagogia. You might be at like a stage 1 sleep onset, because it could be very light sleep, and then you go back into REM when the dream recrystallizes. I'm not really sure, or maybe it's its own thing. But if you go into these spaces, people see different kinds of things. I mean, some people will actually go into a spinning, vortex, and they'll see mathematical symbols and objects. And I think it sort of depends on your own wiring and your own interests. Now, and I had talked about using portals just to get into this space, but you can actually call up a portal in the void as well.
Wow.
And enter the dream in this way. And you can, of course, set an intention about where you want to go. And where do you want to be using the portal? And it will take you there, or it'll take you, in some sort of analog version based on your query. It's it's never exactly maybe as you want it, but it does set the parameters. And I love the portals. One of my favorite ones is to become lucid in the dream and to sit down wherever I am. I'm in a room or whatever. I just sit down, say cross-legged in the room, and if I wait long enough, the floor will just kind of get soft, and I'll just sink through the floor. And then I'll just go through layers and layers and layers, and I could go through almost like floors of buildings, and each room is a different scene, and then I can just stop at a scene I want to stop at.
That's crazy.
So different people have different kind of ways of going about it. You can really like, do the classic sort of induction technique where you say, well, I want to experience, X next time I'm lucid. And you can use the portal to help you get there.
Can you speak a little bit about your book?
About sleep paralysis?
Yes.
Sure. So, sleep paralysis was published just in October of 2010, and it's, you know what? I actually don't have much juice about this right now. You guys want to talk more about lucid dreams?
Sure, dude. Well,
Sure,
hey, we just want
yeah.
to give you an opportunity to pick your book
Yeah.
if you want to, man.
Yeah, what's your experience with portals? Haven't you done this stuff before?
Oh yeah, I just didn't want to make the interview about me or anything. Like this whole time, I'm sitting here like, oh man, I wish I could talk about that stuff.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I've had experiences with portals myself where I did the meditating thing like you were talking about, cross-legged, and have things happen that way. Doors, windows, but my experiences are a lot, very different. Like I lived in the same house as I do now, or I did before, but I was in a different room, And for some reason, I had a lot of lucid dreams and out-of-body experiences in that room. And my door was obviously one of the portals, so I'd walk in or through the door, and I'd be sometimes in my house, but sometimes in somebody else's house, and go explore that way. And had windows a few times, so were kind of interesting, but never used a TV or anything like that, so I think that's kind of interesting that you used a TV. I had a Vortex one that you were talking about where...
Well, the TV one was kind of a cool, because that's a poltergeist.
Oh, yeah, that's right, yeah.
And when I was younger, I would have, and I would be having a lucid dream, and I'd be exploring the lucid dream, and I'd be, like, say, walking through a cave or something, and then a TV would show up.
Oh, no.
And that was sort of like, that was the ha-ha that sometimes occur. And
like
then other times I
thing.
come across, the clown doll.
Oh.
The clown doll is still shows up from time to time. But in any way, being able to use televisions as the portal without fear was sort of a major accomplishment for me. It was sort of like it was the inversion of a symbol,
Yeah, that's pretty cool. My whole thing is I'm always set on the whole nightmare, visual thing going on with scary thing, where you see that. I always call it the dweller kind of thing, but yeah, I still don't understand what that's all about. So,
well, I thought it was interesting when you were speaking about being courageous but loving it. One time, didn't you have they were kind of like those zombie things, and they were freaking you out, but then you started to sort of love them?
Yeah, I was actually taking a Buddhist class, and I think that's one of the main reasons I had most lucid dreams during that period of time. It's because I was paying attention to things, interested in the Buddhist idea of reality and how, their philosophy of life is, and paying attention to that. And started having a lot of lucid dreams and sleep paralysis and, feeling those vibrations and things like that. And then, so I'd have, kept having, sleep paralysis with visualizations going on. And I would see these terrifying things in my room and scare me, to death pretty much. But it's pretty good at overcoming them, scaring them away, and, trying to beat them up and stuff. And my Buddhist teacher said, hey, why don't you just try to be with it and try to understand what it is? And I'm like, that's interesting. I'll try, see what happens. And I had a dream where I saw type of zombie things, and they were in my house, and I knew I could feel them coming, so I knew it was going to occur. And so I was ready for it, and then it showed up, and I was like, and it was trying to attack me, and I was like, hey, calm down, just sit with me, we'll talk it over. And as I sat down with it, I noticed that it was really me. It was like a copy of me, and it was
cool.
It was really sad. And I was like, why are you so sad? And it's like, oh, I'm just disappointed. And I was like, well, what are you disappointed with? And it was like, I'm just disappointed. And I was like, kind of thought about it, and I was like, it's me being disappointed that creates this, like, this figure of, like, fear. And it's really not, anything, fearful. It's just, me disappointed. It's a thought. And, yeah, so it was kind of a different way of understanding it. It was kind of neat to, instead of trying to scare it away, to just be with it and try to understand what it meant.
Yeah, that's a brilliant insight.
And
the courage that it must have taken to say that and to do that. Believe me,
And I just want to tell you one more because it's kind of interesting. I recently had another one where it was a couple months ago where I was trying to find a figure in my dream. It was like the panda, because I had a night terror, not night terror, but sleep paralysis where I saw a panda in my room and it scared the crap out of me. So pandas are nice, so I figured, I'll try to find a panda and talk to it, and figure out like, what it's trying to tell me. It will be the image of my subconscious. That's what I wanted to make it. so I went into this dream and I was looking for this panda, and I found the panda, and it was my subconscious, and then I talked with it, which, had a great conversation, but then I immediately went into another dream because I started waking up in reality, and then I calmed myself down and went into another dream. So I fell back to sleep, I guess. And in that dream, I decided to go look for the panda again. Well, this time I couldn't find a panda, so I was looking around in this library space, and I was looking for a book. And and I was still thinking, well, if I find a panda, then I'll find my subconsciousness. I'll be able to talk to it and have a good conversation again. So then I was talking to these people, and I was like, oh, there's a book for the panda I'm looking for. So immediately the book was in my hands, and I was like, the hell, and I started flipping the pages, and there's these people's faces in it, and it was just type of Mayan or South American type of people's faces. And I started flipping the pages really fast, and I noticed that they're it was a movie, their faces were moving and stuff. And then I couldn't stop flipping the pages and started getting really scared. And suddenly the book disappeared, and I had this weird bad feeling that something was behind me. And so I was like, oh shit, not again,
Mm-hmm.
So I turned around, and it was the girl from The Ring, that little girl.
Oh.
And I was like, shit. I was like, and so I was like, you're not going to get me this time. I was like, I went my standard mode, and I attacked it. And eventually, I went into it, and it itself was like a portal. But the interesting thing I thought about this is, what happens if this was my subconscious trying to talk to me? Rather than the panda being the image, really, it was the girl. And that's what I later kind of felt like it was the image. So, long story short.
Yeah, I know what you mean. You can sometimes play this game of, cat and mouse, trying to look for something in particular in the dream, and then other people will come up to you, and you'll be like, well, no, get out of my way. I'm trying to get this thing over here.
Yeah, exactly.
It's in retrospect, it's so obvious that it's all the same. It's all the same, yeah. That little girl, it's interesting. Her whole thing with the hair and the face. People see that image in other cultures too.
Really?
It's just a terrifying image, almost archetypally. It's not just from The Ring.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because in your book, the cover of it is the hooded figure, and I have seen that, and I never knew you. I never talked to you before, and I've never seen any images like that based on sleep. And I had that figure in my room beating the crap out of me multiple nights, and that's what actually got me involved in this. So,
wow, cool. Well, I was thinking about your experience with sitting and meeting that entity. I hope you keep that in the segment. And it reminded me of a experience I had. It's just a week ago of sleep paralysis, and what happened was I realized I was in paralysis, and then I felt a presence, and then I felt the weight on my chest, and the way that it moved, I couldn't see anything, but it felt like a big snake. It felt like snake energy. But then, I realized I was being faced. There was a human face, up against my face, inches away. And so I couldn't see this. This is all just what it felt like. And I'm still feeling the pressure of it being on me. And I realized it's sort of like this snake entity. And it's facing me directly. And, and it's coming closer and closer. And so without hesitating, without thinking about it, I stuck my tongue out at it. I was, and I woke up. It actually broke the paralysis and woke me up immediately, and And I was like, that was so weird. And I told my wife later, and she said, well, that's interesting. She says, you kind of used a snaky little move there when you went to stick your tongue out at it. And I was like, that was a snaky move. And it made me think, there's this thing about self and other. When you're in correspondence with this entity, you are in the entity. It's in you. It's in flux. It's in play. And I was exhibiting snake consciousness to repel it. and it was kind of, I did it almost, it was playful, but it was also, it was like horror playful, like, well, it can't get any worse, so I'm just going to do this. But that was precisely the right thing to do.
It's crazy.
And so I, meet consciousness with consciousness at the level. And so I was just thinking about your profound story about sitting down and asking that creature what it wanted. You really open up, different kinds of possibilities when you move out of the I'm being attacked, I'm fearful, this thing wants to hurt me, because you just keep the expectation going, and it kind of you're co-creating it. There's something else going on besides our own expectation in this. There's more than that. And to get at that, you have to get away from the fear, though. And that's where these other sort of more hopeful and positive and even spiritual experiences, I think, happen. In sleep paralysis, people talk about seeing angels and things like that, in the same encounter, and ancestors. And what do you have to do? What kind of consciousness do you have to exhibit to have, an experience like that? And that's something we would like to see.
An interesting thing about your book, though, is that it seems to be a guide to help people kind of overcome sleep paralysis, and that's what I took from it anyways. It's kind of like, what is sleep paralysis, and how are some ways that you can deal with it, rather than like the whole medication way, or saying, oh, you're getting possessed by demons. That seems to be a common thing through our society.
Sure.
And so your book is kind of like another way of looking at it, and it seems like a very helpful guide to overcome it. Is it, how does that kind of play into your book, or was that the goal behind it?
Yeah. No, that I appreciate that, those kind words about it. I wanted to reframe sleep paralysis from a modern perspective, but one that values not only what we've learned about the science of the experience, but about the experience in the psychology and the spiritual dimensions to it, because it is spiritual by definition. You are in contact with entities who are not yourself. That's what David Hufford would say. That was what we meant originally by the word spiritual. It's one of these original experiences that with ghost stories and fairy tales and so many other cultural narratives come from, this experience. And to say, oh, this is just this REM phenomena, it's just a dream, wah, 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 it doesn't actually help anybody, because people still have it. And so knowing that, can provide a little bit. You can say, well, okay, I'm in sleep paralysis, this is natural, this is normal. That does provide a little bit of soothingness. But still, it doesn't give you any of the psychological tools about how to meet what's happening to you, and some of the tactics about getting better sleep and preventing sleep paralysis that way, or learning how to ground yourself, or kind of make your bedroom a safer place before you go to bed, because that can make a huge difference. If you're not feeling safe when you go to sleep, you're going to instigate these things, Mm-hmm. And so I tried to make it as useful as possible in terms of how to set up your life, how to set up your diet in your bedroom, and prepare for what's coming, and also, some stories and some, hopefully, energizing and encouraging stories about some of the positive things that can happen once you get over the fear of sleep paralysis.
And is there any specific way that people can get your book? I mean, since it's such a great guide, to help them.
Well, yeah, so Sleep Paralysis is on Amazon, and if you just type Sleep Paralysis Amazon into Google, you'll find it that way as well. And there's another book, actually, that just came out with the same main title.
I know.
By Shelley Adler, And her book is an academic book on sleep paralysis, and it's actually very good, and I recommend it as well. If you want to learn more about the sort of the history and the academic sort of psychological aspects of it. Her book is not a self-help book. Her book focuses on the sort of the historic nightmare.
Oh, okay.
So those are the sort of the two differences. But if for someone who's looking to read more about sleep paralysis, I would recommend her book as well.
And your website definitely has a lot of information on it too, the dreamstudies.org.
Yeah, in fact, I think I've done so many book excerpts from my book Sleep Paralysis on Dream Studies. I think probably 40% of the book is on the website. If you just went through different posts, did a category search, you could find there's so much material that's available for free. I really wanted to make the most important stuff easily available for anybody, that they didn't have to pay for it. And that's kind of my I guess my motto with everything I do with blogging is I try to make as much as free as possible, but now I'm selling these ebook products so I can actually continue doing this.
That's great. And what's your future with your website, and what are some, you said that you're working on another ebook, and like the future of your studies, I guess.
Yeah, so right now I'm just starting writing a book on lucid dreaming. It'll be a book for beginners. It'll be a way of reframing the experience. It'll just be an ebook at first, and maybe it'll only ever be an ebook. And it'll be kind of a kit for not only, of course, the best methods of having lucid dreams. Actually, I won't be covering that because you can get so much of that for free already. But really, how to work with the dreams and how to work with those roadblocks that come up. And everyone has their own roadblocks. And sort of, working with those roadblocks, because the roadblocks are actually the path. Once you find your roadblock, you found your path. There's no roadblocks when you're not on a road.
It's true. Very true. I like that.
So I'm hoping to just continue to do more of this, to do more writing, get some more material out, and that's my plan.
That's awesome. Is this like your main job, pretty much? Then is your dreamstudies.org and doing conferences and stuff, or?
No, I have client work as well.
Oh, that's great.
I do editing, blog writing, other kinds of white papers and things like that for freelance.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Well, Ryan, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Yeah, thanks.
Hey, I really enjoyed it, guys. Thanks for having me.
So thanks for listening, and if you enjoyed this episode, or if you have enjoyed our podcast, or even reading some of our blog information, please, again, if you have the ability to do so, please support us on our Patreon page. Again, you can find that at taileaters.com/CE podcast, and visit the link there. Thanks, and we look forward to sharing some more information on our next episode. Thank you, and happy dreaming.